Brad Olsen is the author of 10 books, including 3 in the Esoterica series. His latest book, Modern Esoteric, Future Esoteric, and the newly released Beyond Esoteric. And he's currently working on a book about Antarctica, which is going to be titled Untold History in the Ice Continent.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Welcome back, Brad, to Exopolitics Today.
Hey, Michael, it's always great to be back on Exopolitics Today. Thanks for having me on.
I know you have traveled to Antarctica and you have seen some of the things down there. So I guess that you saw things or you've learned about things that's motivated you to kind of like start thinking about writing a book. So yeah, what was the main kind of drive for starting to work on this book?
Well, going down there was a big help because then I gained a perspective of what the ice continent was really like. It truly is over 99% covered with ice. And I went on a sailboat across the Drake Passage, and that was probably the hardest trip I've ever taken. I've traveled all 7 continents on Earth now, and this was the one that really kicked my butt because the Drake Passage is a very stormy sea between the Atlantic, Pacific, and Southern Oceans. So the swells, I'm not kidding, were about 3 stories tall at one time. So to get down there and go to this forbidden land, which so few humans ever see, only about 300,000 per year make it down there. And if you divide that into the 8 billion alive today, it's a very small percentage of people will ever see Antarctica. It's kind of like doing research on Mars, Michael. If we were talking about the Cydonia region, oh, it would be great to go check out those 5-sided pyramids and the face looking up. You just can't go there. So there's just so much mystery about what's going on down there. Of course, you're an author on an Antarctica book as well. And so I think for both of us, just to set the record straight and to pull together the research that we've done into Antarctica. Some of this has been in my esoteric series of books. In Beyond Esoteric, I talk about some of the findings I got down there, and also in Future Esoteric about the Fourth Reich, which I know you know a lot about with the escaped Nazis after World War II. And just to dive deeply more into that, into the New Schwabenland, and although that's in an area that I didn't get close to, I would like to go there, and I might go back again, actually. We have a venture capital company called VC Cross, who's currently raising funds to go back down there with a film crew and to do some location shooting, such as at the Schumacher Ponds in New Schwabenland. And I'll show some slides of some of these areas when we come up to it. But just to say that when I went down there, I think I'm the only researcher in this field that was going down there with the sole intent purpose of looking into a lot of these mysteries, a lot of what we've heard of craft under the ice or pyramids poking their way through, or any kind of sign for a lost or antediluvian civilization. And actually, you and I were having this conversation 6 years ago about what I should see when I was in the Palmer Peninsula. And you told me, try to check out Rothschild Island, which is on their Palmer Peninsula. And you've also sent me since then some Google Earth images, I think they're in New Schwabenland, of what look like perfectly symmetrical building foundations. So the mystery continues, Michael, and I'm so glad we're having this conversation because you're someone in this field who is collecting the information like I am, and we can share it with your audience.
Well, yes, you have been doing some research and down there, and you have also been studying some ancient documents as well as kind of more recent documents about what's down there. So you did send me a slideshow. So let's start going through that, because there are some really interesting slides that you wanted to kind of discuss. Well, here is your opening slide, and I guess just that was interesting. You wanted to say something about how far out the ice extends in the winter.
Yeah, and this picture shows it because you can see the sea ice going all the way to the northern tip of the Palmer Peninsula, just about where your cursor is. And then you can see the southern tip of South America. That's the closest continental connection to Antarctica, and that's the Drake Passage, of course, between there. So when the ice is this far out, you really can't take a boat there, because where we were sailing in the top quarter of the Palmer Peninsula, on the top side of the peninsula, all that ice is largely gone. There were a couple times we did have to turn around one time trying to go through the Lemire Passage, and then another time when we were going to the Vernansky Ukrainian base, that we also had to be up there, all hands on deck with poles pushing away the ice as we slowly went through with our boat. So it was a hairball trip, I got to tell you. If you go overboard, you got about 1 minute to get rescued before you succumb to hypothermia. The water is sub-freezing, and the whole trip was just really wrought with danger. But fortunately, nobody died. But one guy got hurt pretty bad when a rogue wave hit our sailboat, and he would have gone over had he not been strapped in with a cable to a life vest. But he did bash up his leg pretty good. So it was a tough trip. And so many people say, oh, I want to go down there. That sounds great. But you got to know what you're getting into. And this is what you're getting into. You're getting into all this sea ice in the winter down there, which, of course, seasons are opposite. Our summer's their winter. And you really have to wait until the period starting right now, because mid-November until early March is the only window of opportunity to go down there. And so I'm doing this research now on my new book, and I have this research assistant that just kind of fell in my lap, and he's been great. We communicate every day, and I share some of my stuff with him. And the reason I call this navigating under the frozen continent is because we've come into some maps that have been fairly recently distributed on the internet. People can find it now. But he speaks German fluently. He's Dutch, but he's fluent in German. So he's able to translate the U-boat instructions to get down under the ice. So the U-boats would have to travel basically under the pack ice, which does last all year round. It doesn't always go away. But just about the bottom of Antarctica there, a little over to the right, right where your cursor is, that's New Schwabenland. That's where these maps for the U-boats picture them going into under the frozen continent.
I have come across some of those maps in the past, but you were able to find some that were very much clearer. So and you know the history about those maps. So this is the 1938, 1939 New Schwabenland expedition. So you want to tell us about that expedition, because this is all about how the Nazis were able to get under the ice pack and establish their base 211.
Base 211 and the New Berlin base. We've come to discover they are two separate entities. And the New Berlin base is mentioned on one of these maps we're going to look at, showing the under ice topography. Really amazing. And I just got the backstory of how these maps came to be. It was right around, right after the fall of the Soviet Union. So the early 1990s, a journalist in Moscow was at a flea market, and there were these boxes that still had the address to go to a command center in Berlin, Germany. And there were all these duplicate maps and a whole bunch of other stuff he bought on the black market, and then as a journalist went through them and found it. But in this particular picture, you see some of the Third Reich soldiers pre-World War II going down and making a land claim in New Schwabenland, which on today's globes is called Queen Maud Land. And it's also part of the Norwegian claims. In fact, there's a couple Norwegian bases that we'll see that are directly over this under ice passage that Frank, my research assistant in Holland, has been able to map out. But why don't we go up just to the second slide in this show, and just to say that if we look back on some of the maps, especially this 1513 Piri Reis map, just 21 years after Columbus made his first trip over, you have a map with a near perfect coastal outline of South America. And then it extends down and around just about where the continental Antarctica would be on a map. So these old maps, which is going to be a chapter in my book based on Charles Hapgood's book called Map of the Ancient Sea Kings, that show Antarctica not years, not decades, but centuries before it was discovered in 1820. So it's truly remarkable that all of these older maps have Antarctica down there. What did they know that we didn't know until 200 years ago? So what's also interesting about this, Michael, is that where the arrow points, that is now an ice shelf, and it's permanently covered with ice. And they see there's a couple islands down there. They have done sonar scans over the ice shelf and found that indeed there are islands down there. So what it looks like is this map was copied from much older maps. In fact, it even says so in the liner notes in the Piri Reis map, that it came from maps all the way down back from the time of Ptolemy, the ancient Greek, and also the Library of Alexandria. So these maps are quite telling too, and I think they give a good story. And you go to the next slide, you have in southern part of South America, the southern tip, you actually see the Patagonian giants. And there are many illustrations of these giants that live there. And then this Monte Urbano map, less than 100 years after Columbus's voyage, also shows all the way around a landmass. And in a couple points, there are openings. So that's kind of interesting. I know a lot of flat earthers would say that's the way into inner Earth or something like this, but I would interpret that as saying this could be passages into and under the ice in Antarctica.
Piri Reis map, and I know I've looked at the Orontius Phineas map. I mean, they do depict Antarctica when it was ice free, and you know, my speculation was that these maps must date to like 9,700 BC, you know, before the end of the Younger Dryas, you know, where the sea levels kind of like rose tremendously. I mean, some estimate like 800 feet. So yeah, do you kind of recall that information and how, you know, the rising sea levels and the possibility of the Earth's shifting poles led to Antarctica being buried under all this ice?
And that's exactly right, because at a location called Mount Buckley, which is at the top of the Beardmore Glacier, there are fossils of megafauna and megaflora from the time when Antarctica could only have been a steaming hot jungle, when ferns could grow and when dinosaurs could roam. In fact, there are some species of dinosaurs which are cold-blooded reptile creatures that could only have lived in Antarctica when it was a jungle. And in fact, they found them in several locations, but Mount Buckley is the most important one. Well, this here's another map. This was created by the Germans for the New Schwabenland expedition. You can see they named all these mountains and mountain ranges with German names. But I would like to focus on the lower left-hand corner there, the Schumacher Seengroupie. That is a group of lakes, yes, with some hills around them, also called the Schumacher Hills. And this is where the seaplane landed in the largest lake. And from there, the search party left to the Schumacher Hills area where they found point 211, base 211 is right there in the Schumacher Hills. This is in the book called Black Sun by Henry Stevens. He even says that this is called a Arctic oasis, that it's warm enough that the soldiers would occasionally come above ground, because we assume their base was largely underground or under the ice, but they would come up, because I'm German too. I love sitting in the sun and getting a suntan, but they could also raise some crops there, which I would tell you is pretty near to impossible, because everywhere else, it's just so thick with ice up on the polar plateau, 2 miles thick. But here you can see in the next slide, this is a Google Earth shot I took of the Schumacher Ponds. So the hills then are right on all sides of it. There are 2 bases there, which is really interesting too. There's an Indian base right about where your cursor is, and then a Russian base on another lake. And both of those bases have long piers that go out into the lake. You zoom in on them on Google Earth. It's really fascinating. And these lakes never freeze, so they must be getting heat from geothermal sources. But here is the place where the landing party went out and found a base. And there's a lot of speculation, including some data points, that this was a pre-existing base, possibly even a Draco reptilian base that they just said, here's the coordinates, go and find it. If you find it, you can have it. And that's kind of interesting, because I know in exopolitics, we talk about all the different alien species and how they are interacting with Earthlings, including the Nazis during World War II.
Tompkins had to say, he said that what he learned, or what the US Navy learned from these spies embedded in Nazi Germany during the war, that they had been given and told where these bases were in Antarctica, and that these were former reptilian bases, and the reptilians simply handed them over to the Nazis and just gave them directions on how to get to the bases. So and according to Bill Tompkins, that was officially learned by the US Navy during the Second World War.
Exactly. So if we can assume that this is the location where they did land the plane in the largest lake there, and they did go off on a search party for about a week. And you don't really want to be exposed to the elements there if you get a couple bad wind days. So I think that they did find a way in, and they did go underground. And so it's interesting now that there are 2 bases that are also in the Schumacher Seengroupie, in the group of lakes there to this day. I hope they will give us permission to go there, because I think this would be really fascinating to explore around and fly a drone. But who knows? Maybe it's still a sensitive location. But maybe the Indians will let us do it, or the Russians come in. But you do need to have support from the bases, and they don't always like to do that, because they've got their own agenda. They got their own things to do, to let some people just show up at their base. And stay over and eat some meals and film. But it also could be that it's still it's top secret and they don't want people filming. So we'll see when we get to the scheduling portion. Schumacher Ponds is definitely high on my list on places I would like to go.
And are these is this Indian and Russian base? Are they permanent bases or just seasonal?
They do look permanent. I'd have to look into that because there is a base also in the New Schwabenland area called the Conan base, where in 2013 they were excavating what looks like some giant machine under the ice. That is a seasonal base. But the German Neumayer base, also in the New Schwabenland area, that is a year-round base. But here's what's so interesting, Michael. I was going over maps from the Cold War era, and those German bases were still there. They never left. After World War II, they kept their permanent bases there year-round, especially at the Neumayer base. But who knows what they have going on here? My new research assistant, Frank, he says that they turned over this base that they found to the UN. And I'll have to get some more information how he knows that. But apparently there is a massive reptilian base right under the Schumacher Ponds that's also heated with geothermal energy coming up that heats these ponds. And it's quite livable. You could go around and do your business just wearing a t-shirt.
It's very important right there that you have these warm ponds that clearly are heated geothermally so that they don't freeze over during the year. That kind of points to there being geothermal activity underneath that area of New Schwabenland. And scientific studies have come out showing that where you have thermal activity underneath the ice sheets, you actually have habitable zones. And that's exactly what people like Bill Tompkins, Henry Stevens have been saying, that the Germans were able to find and build bases underneath the ice sheets. And if because of the geothermal heat, that this made it livable.
Yep. And remember what Admiral Dolan said in 1943, that the U-boat fleet has found for the Fuhrer an impregnable fortress in a land of ice. I'm paraphrasing the quote, but basically he was, I would say, suggesting that it was in Antarctica. Could be Greenland, which the Germans did have bases at the northern tip of Greenland. The Thule base, which has been taken over by the U.S., is now a U.S. base in north of Greenland. So the mysteries of what lie under the ice is certainly one of the great questions today, especially if anyone is interested in World War II history, because I think we know that the Germans didn't just lose the war and drop out and go away, that they did set up a Fourth Reich. Jim Mars, of course, wrote a book on it. Your research. My research is that they set up shop in South America and Antarctica with a lot of their high technology that they got out of Germany at the end of the war.
Okay, so here's a representation of the inner Earth. And you want to tell us about this German pilot Schumacher, the seaplane, and about this entrance to point 211 and the base?
Sure. Well, this is just an artist representation. I don't think this is a real photograph, but I just wanted to include it to show sort of the scale and what might be seen in some of these locations under the ice, where some of the daylight might trickle through the ice, but it does seem that there's an external lighting source as well, which is another mystery. But Schumacher, he landed the plane. He stayed with the plane while the crew went to find this inner Earth, or I think more appropriately titled Under the Ice base. And Schumacher was doing depth checks from the plane and finding out that indeed the water gets warmer the deeper you go, proving that those lakes never froze because of inner thermal heat. Well, the expedition was successful. They came back to the plane and then they flew back to the Schwabenland ship, where then all of a sudden, after the New Schwabenland expedition, fleets of U-boats started to bring personnel and supplies down to New Schwabenland. And being a U-boat, a submarine, you don't just dock on the side of one of these ice shelves. That would be a very dangerous and difficult way to offload. You follow the under ice passages. And I think that's exactly what they did.
In 1938-39 with the New Schwabenland expedition, they had a seaplane that flew in that Schwabenland area, and they landed at the lakes.
Yep, at the Schumacher Ponds.
At the ponds, right, at the ponds. And they landed there, and that's how they were able to find the entrance to what would be the base.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So now let's look at, the British Operation Tabarin. And so the Nazis established their base in Antarctica. They expanded out, and the British in 1945-46, and I think it was 45-46, that's when they launched their operation to seek and find and destroy the Nazi base. So you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, and these are two of the British spying stations on the Palmer Peninsula. These are pictures I took on my trip. One of them, the top picture, is Port Lockroy, and it's now a museum. You can mail a letter from Antarctica. You can see a couple penguins shuffling around. Both of these locations are on the northern part of the Antarctic Peninsula there. And the second photo is a completely abandoned spy station of the British, and it's near the Vernansky base. So one day we were told you could just walk over there and the door's unlocked. And we went in and explored around, and everything is still set up like it would be in the mid-1940s, even cans of food on the shelves and the old radios that they used. So they were doing their spying there, and then realized that the Germans had created a substantial settlement in New Schwabenland. And that's when they called in the Americans after World War II and began Operation High Jump.
Okay, here's the Admiral Richard Byrd, who really was a key figure in Operation High Jump. But he was a renowned polar explorer, and you want to tell us about his famous flight over the South Pole?
Yeah, and you can see the dates on that postage stamps of several of his other famous historic flights. He almost beat the first flight over the Atlantic, but then there's some people that say he didn't quite go far enough to be the first aviator to go over the North Pole, but he definitely was the first pilot to fly over the South Pole. And you can see his route map in more detail on the right. So they left from Little America, the base he founded near the Ross Ice Shelf. And what's interesting about this one is the blow up of when he got to the South Pole, Michael. You see on the right-hand side, you see a little triangle. So he gets to the pole, and then he basically flies in that triangular formation. The blow up is the next map on the right. And lo and behold, that triangular formation where he flew over is right where Brian S., the whistleblower to Linda Moulton Howe, who I have spoken to on the phone, said that the hole in the ice is located. The hole in the ice is also protected with this no-fly zone today. Of course, there was no such thing when Admiral Byrd went over. But the point is, he would have certainly seen it in this location when he flew beyond the pole there. and then made it back to Little America. So this would have been 1929, and then did that flight again in 1946, the beginning of Operation High Jump. And this is when in his diary, he was telepathically instructed to only bring his radio man, not a crew, and to fly back to this hole in the ice, which he did. And then in the diary, it describes him going in and seeing this verdant green landscape. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Then all of a sudden, he loses control of the plane, but it's still able to maneuver. And two, what he called flugelrods or UFOs come wingtip to wingtip. And then over the radio is a Germanic or Nordic voice that says, welcome, Admiral Byrd. You are in good hands. We will be arriving shortly in the domain of the Ariani. And then they put down and landed in front of this pastel glimmering city. I imagine it was something like the Emerald City in the Wizard of Oz. And then Admiral Byrd was summoned to meet with the, quote, master of the people of the domain of the Ariani. And the master admonished Admiral Byrd for America testing nuclear bombs, dropping nuclear bombs in Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and said, take the message back to your superiors at the Pentagon to do away with nuclear bombs. He said, of course I will. And they let him go, and they flew him out the same way he came. And the last thing the pilot said when they came over the radio is, auf Wiedersehen, which is goodbye in German. And also on those Flugelrad were the insignia of the Iron Cross, which was insignia of the Third Reich and the fighting forces of Germany. So that is where I believe the New Berlin base is. And when I show you some of the additional mapping that Frank, the research assistant, did, we've been able to track the route of the U-boats. And it's very close to under the South Pole region. So there's this massive hole in the ice about 50 miles from the South Pole Station, perhaps an exhaust from the geothermal heat, that there must be a massive cavern down there, a massive under ice dome that Frank has used the exact coordinates of taking a U-boat underneath. This is part of this data dump of these documents that were acquired right after the fall of the Soviet Union. And he not only translated the route map for the U-boats, but he also got down there to track it on Google Earth, which we'll see here in a minute.
Okay, so very important that you were able to meet with Brian, the Navy pilot, or I think it was a navigator, wasn't he? He talked about seeing this massive hole or entranceway at the South Pole. And I actually met him as well at one of the Contact in the Desert conferences. He came over and just introduced himself. He didn't share his contact info or anything like that. He just wanted to just say, yeah, I'm a real person.
Good.
And he did that. But he is someone that confirmed that there is a hole leading into the interior there at the South Pole. And so, well, that would make sense that this would be a site for a second German base. So base 211 up in Schwabenland and New Berlin down there under the South Pole.
Because if you have these Germans who are flying Flugelrods and escorting Admiral Byrd in with his plane, and then he saw other insignia, including on their uniforms, perhaps they were allowed in. I don't think they built New Berlin, if it is the same as this domain of the Ariani. This seems to be a much older civilization that existed there. And just by being invited in and allowed to join with them, perhaps they called it New Berlin base. That's just my theory working on at the moment, because you'll see where the U-boats would go to, and they would in the instructions, they would follow this exact path, longitude, latitude, up and down with the U-boat at certain angles and degrees. And then eventually they would get to the lighthouse of Agartha, and there it is. So this is one of a dozen or more maps that are identical, Michael, that I just found out from Frank, that this journalist in Russia just bought a box of them that were supposed to be mailed to the Navy and to be distributed to all the U-boat captains. This was the most latest updated map in 1945, but the war ended and they couldn't get them out in time. And then the KGB came. They took everything they could out of Berlin, even the chandeliers and the furniture, but most importantly, anything with intelligence on it. They cataloged it, they archived it, and then they forgot about it. It wasn't until after the Soviet Union collapsed that people could go into the KGB offices and pull this stuff out and sell it on the black market. That's why you have alien autopsy videos from Russia. You've got crashed UFOs shot from different angles that have come out. And this is all because right after the Soviet Union collapsed, people were desperate for hard currency. The ruble had pretty much collapsed in its value. So you show up in Moscow in the early 1990s with a suitcase full of $100 bills, you can maybe have scored some of this incredible stuff. So on this map, Frank has done the translations in German. Now, the right-hand map is under the Arctic Ocean, and we're still not sure where Liberia is. I asked him, could that be northern coast of Canada? Doesn't quite look like that. And what are these islands doing there? We're still piecing that one together. But on the left, it is definitely under the ice of New Schwabenland, because New Schwabenland is mentioned right there on the map. So right underneath those Schumacher ponds, say there was a way to get down there. They found that triangular island on the lower left on the left-hand map. Also on this map, you have a U-boat docking station. You actually have an entrance there on the very bottom of that left-hand map where you would enter below the sea ice and then follow these exact directions. And we'll go over that in just a moment. But also here on this map is New Berlin. It's also mentioned on this map, as well as some other very exotic locations. So the Germans were obviously privy to not only entering with the U-boats, and what an adventure that must have been to go down there and find some of these areas unexplored, but then to come across perhaps high-tech civilizations that have been there for a long, long time. And so Frank just gives some translations on the map here, and this is very authentic. And I've got pictures of this journalist flipping through all the maps. There were many duplicates of this one. This was going to go out to all the U-boat captains in 45 had the war gone on a little further.
Well, here's a detailed map showing the route under the ice sheet. And yeah, I mean, it's good to just keep in mind that, you know, when ice freezes, it freezes over water that continues to flow. And so the same principle applies in Antarctica, where the surface ice forms, but underneath the water continues to flow. And so here you have the Antarctic continent underneath the ice sheets, and there's the water level. So you want to kind of just elaborate on,
Sure.
on all of
Yeah,
that?
so Frank added the color, and he added the U-boat route in light green. And then there you see a little submarine floating over the under ice lake there. But just to give some characterization of what is ice, what is lake water, and what is the continental landmass. So you see, they're really not even going through rock tunnels so much, but just kind of navigating under the ice, finding a lake that they could sail for many miles before they drop down again. And so this was just a way to understand the map. But this actual detailed map was part of that double hemisphere map as well. But Frank enhanced it to make it more visually readable.
And in these underwater kind of under ice cavities there, what would the oxygen level be like? I mean, you have whether it's a submarine floating on the surface of this kind of under ice lake, or whether you're having a civilization there. I mean, would the oxygen content be more or less or equivalent to the surface?
That's a great question. And I don't really have any way of knowing, but it did appear that when Admiral Byrd got out of his plane and was escorted into the domain of the Ariane, they were not wearing masks or anything. So it seems that there is enough oxygen down there to breathe. But that's a good point. Like trees and plants produce oxygen from CO2. So how would it get down there? But I guess air has a way of flowing, maybe through that big hole in the ice. Because it was no problem breathing when I was in Antarctica above, and there were no trees or bushes down there.
Well, I know just roughly from estimates that I think oceans produce, is it 60% or 70% of the Earth's oxygen? So
that's right.
I imagine that, down there in that cavity, you have oxygen being created by the ocean water underneath. But still, yeah, it would be interesting to know, what are we talking, like 20% oxygen as compared to the surface, more or less? But just an interesting question. Here's some more, the exact boat directions. So, yeah, I've seen this map before, or I've seen these directions before, but you want to elaborate on this?
So yeah, the picture on the left is also on the same map with the double hemispheres and the route going in and around, but it's all in German. So Frank interpreted that, and by using the exact directions, including the nautical miles and the pitch of the U-boat, when it's supposed to dive, when it's supposed to come up. The Germans are very exact engineers, especially in any kind of instruction booklet. They don't leave anything to the imagination. It's always very precise what they're trying to convey. And these were the instructions to the U-boat captains that were to go out in those 1945 maps, the latest instructions to how to get to this inner Earth civilization. And it even mentions the lighthouse of Agartha, that when you reach the lighthouse of Agartha, you then surface and you're basically pretty close to this location. And then you pull out packet number 3, and we haven't been able to find or decipher that yet, but it's basically what the U-boat crew is meant to do when they enter this under ice civilization, the protocols, how they should behave.
I mean, that's truly amazing that they had that level of information that they were sharing with their U-boat captains, and of course, no one else in the British, the Americans, the Russians, they didn't know any of that, but the Germans had been helped, as Bill Tompkins said, by the Reptilians to be able to do all of this.
Absolutely.
Here's the next slide, and you want to tell us about this one. This gives us an idea of just how lengthy the under ice journey was for the U-boats.
Yeah, and so the top left is just a blow up of where they entered under the sea ice and then went into an entrance. And so this map of the continent is not quite exact. It's actually a lot of ice on top of the continental landmass that they could have navigated all of this in the water and just dipping under the ice pack, because Antarctica is really lot of islands, including the Antarctic Peninsula and even Eastern Antarctica. It is a solid plate, one of the original land masses from Pangaea or Gondwanaland that broke off in subsequent pole shifts and moved to its present location. But what Frank did in this map, which I think is absolutely fascinating, took the map that we saw, the one he colored, and that's it on the side, and he showed the exact route. And look at where it terminates. That is almost dead reckoning of the South Pole. So we have the hole in the ice that Brian S. saw and other witnesses. There's another Russian whistleblower named Tazinski who also speaks of this hole in the ice. It's several miles across, about 50 miles from the South Pole. So even if you were stationed at the South Pole, you couldn't see it and you wouldn't know about it. Just like me here in Nevada, Michael, I live a couple mountain ranges over from Area 51 and Nellis Air Force Base. I wouldn't know if they're doing any kind of secret experiments over there, nor would you down in Key West if there was something on a military base there or in Hawaii when you used to live. So the point is, just because you were at the pole station, certain someone, that you may not know what's going on, okay? Especially if it's a top secret entrance to a presumed civilization under the ice. So in this particular map, it's really interesting. In the upper left-hand corner, you see the route. It's a blow up just of where it enters under the continental ice shelf. And it goes almost directly under a Norwegian base called Troll. And you can see a tiny little white speck there near the Troll base and that yellow line. Frank seems to think that Google Earth is obscuring that area, and there could be a way, an elevator or some way to go down, maybe another hole in the ice, where the Norwegians have two bases right there, Troll and Tor base. And those bases may also have some kind of access to this route, because the bigger map on the right, which Frank has charted out from the Nazi map on its side there, shows the exact route over Google Earth. This is an exclusive breakthrough to be able to chart this with the directions that the German U-boat captains were given to get to this under ice location.
This kind of map before. I mean, I was aware of the Germans being able to navigate under the ice sheets in New Schwabenland, but here you've got them able to navigate all the way to what appears to be, as you said, the South Pole. The red dots and the blue dots along the path, I mean, do they have any relationship to Base 211 and the city of Agatha?
That would be about 200 miles or so to the right. So almost where that other map overlays. It's not quite right underneath there. That's why I think 211 is the Schumacher Pond area and New Berlin is the domain of the Ariane area. And those red dots, I think those are some of the research stations along the way, including the German Neumayer base as well, is still there in that exact area.
Very interesting. Okay, so here's the next slide where you have this letter with the instructions, or talking about the U-boat excursions and giving information. So you want to talk a little bit about who is Karl Unger and what he had to say.
So he was one of the just personnel on one of the U-boats, and somehow he managed to get a letter out before they fully went in there. And the screen's a little too small for me to read, but it is interpreted there. If you wanted to read the letter, Frank has put the words underneath. But basically, he's saying, we have arrived at Inner Earth. We're not prisoners, and we're going to be staying here. You won't be seeing me again, but it's been a fantastic voyage. And he sent it to his best friend, and the family and the friend knew his handwriting, said that was absolutely Carl Unger, and it was put into the record as here's another data point that the Germans had penetrated deep underneath the Antarctic ice and had found some kind of inner Earth or under ice civilization.
There, as I can see, is looks on the left-hand side. It looks like it's 1947. Is that correct?
Yeah, so this is even post-war, and
Mhm.
they're still doing these Antarctic route U-boat runs, not necessarily from Germany or Europe anymore, but there were over 100 U-boats that have just gone missing after World War II. Of course, some of them came up at Mar del Plata in Argentina in May of 1945, or in the summer of 1945. I should say the war ended in May 1945. And then a couple months later, you've got these really big and very sophisticated U-boat submarines, which they were part of the Führer convoy. They were so large, they were like containers that they could have easily taken out the Honeyboo or Railcraft, disassembled portions of them and fit them into these very large submarines. And of course, the Americans got the U-boat captain and crew and said, what are you doing here? The war's been over a couple months. And they admitted they had just come back from Antarctica. So more data points that these U-boat excursions were taking place before the war, during the war, and even after the war.
Now, with the captains and the crew of these U-boats that were traveling down there to Antarctica, you did share these passports. Now, is this like, are these authentic? Are these reproductions? Or can you tell us about these passports?
Yeah, Frank found these for me, and the next one is an officer, a U-boat commander, but you notice it's a passport to New Schwabenland. It's and the officer one is to the New Berlin base. So they were issuing these passports. This guy, he does his homework. He's a very astute researcher, because I've showed him some things and he says, no, we've already dismissed that. He'll only send me stuff that he's absolutely sure is real. And look at this. So this is the Führer convoy. It says on this passport that this is the Kriegsmarine, the U-boat fleet going down there, New Berlin base, New Schwabenland. I mean, in their passport. And Frank has assured me these are authentic. He has done extensive research on German websites, World War II history, interpreting and translating these documents. And he feels when he passes things on to me that they are authentic. And then, so also the U-boats officially, there were built 863, sunk 336, but then they would rename them and recycle them and put them back into the fleet. So Frank thinks it's more like 200 U-boats went unaccounted for. Now, some of them may be just wreckages at the bottom of the sea, but certainly with that many that have gone missing, they were doing something. And that something was taking the route to Antarctica, as they called it, right to New Schwabenland, and then occasionally going to South Africa or to Argentina or Chile to refuel and resupply. And that's why those U-boats showed up at Mar del Plata, Argentina in the summer of 1945. That was one of their demarcation points. And remember Perron, who Eva Peron's husband, he was a fascist. He was a Nazi sympathizer. It wasn't until the very end of World War II that Argentina backed the Allies because they knew that they were backing the wrong horse with the Nazis there at the end of the war. So he was very sympathetic to their cause. And when I was in South America, Michael, right before this trip 6 years ago, I went to a number of the locations where they say Hitler survived the war and was spotted afterwards. The Eden Hotel in La Falda, and the Inalche house in near Bariloche in Patagonia. There are all these places that are very Germanic. I tell you, I've been to Bavaria and Germany several times, and going to these German towns in Argentina is like you're just walking into a Bavarian village sometimes. And they're very wealthy too. The Germans basically are the most wealthy citizens of the various South American countries too.
So yeah, these passports, I mean, they actually mention base 211. So
Yep.
it suggests that whatever was set up under the ice sheets there by the Germans during the Second World War survived the war, and these officers and personnel continued to travel back and forth. Now, more recently, according to the history in my book, Antarctica's Hidden History, maybe you can throw that up, Jazz. In there, I talk about the agreements that had been reached between the Germans and the American military-industrial complex. That there were senior officials like Alan Dulles, who was heading the CIA, and his brother John Foster Dulles. I mean, they were the two guys that were in 1933. They were over there in Germany, and they were telling the German industrial class that Hitler's okay. I mean, he'll build your economy, and as far as we in the West, because they were working for a high-powered law firm, the Dillon Company, and they gave Hitler the green light. So the Dulles brothers, I mean, they actually met Adolf Hitler in 1933, and then you have the agreements, or the end of the war, and then you have both Dulles brothers becoming Secretary of State and CIA director. These agreements reached with the Germans in Antarctica and South America. So yeah, so in there I described the bases, how they then were expanded, but eventually they were handed over to who? I mean, what does your research say about who those bases were handed over to?
To the United Nations, to the globalists. That after a while, the Germans didn't really like living there anymore, and the majority of them had moved to South America, where I found some of the bases there of the Fourth Reich, and not too far away from La Falda, where the Eden Hotel is, and sightings of Hitler after the war, that they were doing their honeyboo and vril craft testing at this mountain called Cerro Monte. And you go into the town and there's pictures of aliens and UFOs. It's kind of like going into Rachel, Nevada near Area 51. A lot of alien kitsch in this little village. And so Emily Infinity and I, we were driving a Ford Expedition, and we were camping in the vehicle. We thought, oh, let's do a night watch. And so we camped out there, and we didn't see anything, of course. But I'm reading in the Lonely Planet that there had been many sightings in the area, including burn marks on the ground, and also some abductions, and a lot of people seeing these crafts flying in and out and around this mountain. So when I got back, I talked to my friend David Hatcher Childress, who also writes books on the Fourth Reich and Antarctica and the vril craft and some of their technologies. And, well, Brad, those weren't UFO alien craft. Those were the Nazi craft they were testing in an underground base there. He says, real UFOs, if they're flown by aliens, don't leave burn marks. They are not usually the ones doing the abducting, and they're not terrorizing the crowd by flying around all the time. So this mountain, Cerro Monte, was, according to Childress, one of the underground bases where they were doing some of their testing. So after Antarctica in the 1950s, they wanted to leave. Nobody really wanted to be there too much, although there are remnants of them that may still be there today. I don't know if you remember, about 2 winters ago, there were reports of groups of German-speaking men that showed up at McMurdo. Not sure how they got there, but they wanted to get off the continent right away. So something had happened. Perhaps some of their bases were getting taken out, or they just found a way to escape and they wanted to. So there's just all this weird stuff about the Germans doing their weapon testing and flights, and as well as these U-boat trips under the ice there too.
Yeah, that was a contact that Elena Danan shared with me. His name was Frank as well. He actually worked for the US Postal Service in Antarctica. And he was sharing information with us. He was the one that told us about the Germans leaving Antarctica, going to Argentina, and that they were just leaving the place. And that was around the same time that Elena was saying that a deal had been reached, that the Dark Fleet was being kicked out, and that it was now being handed over to the Chinese and to the Turks. And so this is when the Chinese were coming in. But the Chinese then got control, and then apparently they decided that this was actually a pretty dangerous piece of land to try and hold on to, or these bases. And apparently they then decided to share that or hand that over to the United Nations.
Yep. And that's another additional data point, as well as Gene Decode, who said around that time they were taking out some underground bases on the Palmer Peninsula, as well as a train tube that extended from southern tip of South America to the Palmer Peninsula. And indeed, right in that time frame, there were a whole bunch of 5.5, 6.0 Richter scale earthquakes 10 kilometers down, which is a real telltale sign, because that's about the level where the train tubes are, as well as many of the bases. So it seems that this White Alliance, this group of benevolent ETs that are taking out these underground bases, were doing their operations there at that time, and these Germans survived and just wanted to get out of there as quick as they could.
Yeah, I remember this Bariloche and Patagonia. I mean, this is a place where President Eisenhower traveled to during his administration, and so I guess that is when the deals were made. And others of American presidents have traveled there. I think Obama traveled there as well. So so this raises the question of, well, is this where the Fourth Reich power center is based, or is that like the entranceway to the kind of bases in Antarctica?
Probably all the above, but more of the capital of the Fourth Reich than any other place I could identify or have been to, because Bariloche is so Germanic, Michael, and it looks just like you're in southern Bavaria, with the Alps resembling the Andes Mountains there, and these beautiful lakes around Bariloche at ski resorts. And it's just such a beautiful area. And of course, Hitler had his eagle's nest in Birch's Garden, which looked just like this place. And that's where the Inalco house was also located, which I tried to get to. I couldn't. It's in a uber gated community area. But in that History Channel TV series called Hunting Hitler, they take a boat over Nepal-Huti Lake and get to the Inalco house via the lake. And indeed, they found a hangar for a seaplane where if the authorities were moving in on them, they could quickly rush down to the seaplane, fly right off the lake and over the crest of the Andes Mountains and be in Chile in less than an hour. They also found that there were air pipes poking up all over the grounds, suggesting that there was a large bunker or underground base near the Analco house, which is probably 20 miles across the lake from Bariloche. It's right there in that area.
Now, as far as the United Nations running what's left over, or what the Germans had created, or what the Dark Fleet once occupied, we have Spartan 1 and Spartan 2 that Linda Moulton Howe interviewed, and they described this kind of like multinational space program out of Antarctica. So, I mean, this is what is operating right now, in your opinion?
Yeah, and then I've had a couple conversations with Linda lately, and the Spartan 1 and 2, just to give a little backstory, found a large black basalt. I want to call it a craft, but it kind of seems more like a building, but it was partly submerged under the ice. And they found a way in, and as you just barely touch a door, that's a huge rock basalt door, and it opened, and then they go in there, and there's these glyphs all the way around in the main room, and it's eerily glowing green, so they could see their way around without lights and stuff. So that's another one. Boy, would that be on my bucket list. And it's in the lower Beardmore Glacier area. So if we were to go to Mount Buckley in the upper Beardmore Glacier area, maybe we could fly over and certainly have some cameras rolling and see if we can pick anything up. But that's absolutely fascinating. That must be one of the 3 of the known Nina Pinta or Santa Maria, named after Columbus's first 3 ships, of the 3 large motherships under the ice. And one that I think would qualify is at the Conan base, where in 2013 they were doing an excavation, and you could see this giant grill about a quarter mile long. And I always like it when I can get matching data points, because the Farsight Institute did the remote view with that as a target. And indeed, they also said it's some kind of massive machine, a defunct mothership craft, but was built for giants, that the ceilings were super high, and the seats and everything else that was still in there was not for humans. We'd be way too small to operate it, but it's long been defunct.
Well, you know JP. I mean, you've met him at the GSIC conference, and he has been interacting with a number of inner Earth civilizations, and he's been told that they are going to be revealing themselves soon. So you mentioned that under the Antarctic ice sheets, that the Germans encountered the Agathans and also encountered Shambhala or the Ariani. So I guess it would be logical to assume that they would be part of this kind of like a greeting, or this kind of like humanity's going to be learning about them as well.
Well, I would say one and the same. It's probably this group that wants to be recognized. Another little interesting tidbit is that these Antarctica Nazis and the Fourth Reich actually set up their own embassies in different countries. And ours was on something like the 35th floor in a building in New York City, and you had to have a special key code for your elevator to stop at that level. And then you're in the embassy for the Antarctica Nazis. So they went underground after World War II. When they lost their fighting forces, then they had to be intelligence gathering. They had to be the money people. The Fourth Reich it's also known as the Third Force. And they were actually the ones fanning the flame of discontent during the Cold War, keeping the NATO countries against the Soviet bloc and vice versa. And they were the ones really messing things up and keeping us at odds and building up this arms race, because then they wouldn't be noticed. But all the while, they're the globalists of today. They're the Klaus Schwabs, the World Economic Forum people, and by extension, the United Nations, which is a captured operation. It is definitely run by these globalist groups, Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations. These are all the outward form of these globalists who wish to implement their New World Order and all the other devious plans they have for the human race.
And to that, we can add the Bilderberg Society, the Bilderberg meetings that they have annually. Yep. So these globalists, I mean, they, as you said, they've been pitting us off against one another. But now you have this new Trump administration that's coming in. And a lot of people have hope that this marks a new era, that the kind of contrived conflict between Russia and the West is going to be ended. So what do you think that this new Trump administration is going to bring? Is it going to bring kind of peace and kind of disclosure and awakening, or and are the globalists truly out of the picture now?
Well, they're not out of the picture quite yet, but he's calling them out. And he said in one of these recent post-election speeches that he wants to put an end to the deep state. And he's given them a run for their money like nobody else has in a position of power that he's in. So it really gives me a lot of hope that, excuse me, that he might put an end to this globalist agenda.
Wonderful. Well, we do look forward to that. I guess we'll find out in the months ahead. So, Brad, anything you want to share with my audience before we finish? Your website and your current book project?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. All my books, as well as other authors that are published with CCC Publishing, Michael Jaco, Laura Eisenhower, Leo Lyons-Zagami, and several other authors, including all of my books, can be found at cccpublishing.com. And if you order one of my books, I can send a signed copy out as they go through my office here. Also, bradolsen.com is where my upcoming conference schedule is, sometimes speaking with Michael Sala at various different venues and events. So CCC Publishing and bradolsen.com is the best way to find out more about what I'm up to, where I'll be next. And my upcoming book is called Secrets of Antarctica, The Untold History Under the Ice Continent. And that'll be out in about a year from now. We're just announcing it with my distributor this week. So it's a brand new, in fact, this is the first time I've made a public announcement of this book and its title. So that's what I'm up to.
I look forward to it. You've got some fantastic new information to share about Antarctica. So I'm so glad that you were able to introduce that to the world through this podcast. So thank you, Brad, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you, Michael. Great to talk to you again. And you added a lot of great new information to this conversation too. So till the next time we speak again, thank you for having me on.
Aloha.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Sala. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Sala. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.